All right, welcome. My name is Hamid. I am the current chairman of the Institute for Public Relations Measurement Commission and also the managing partner of Radian Partners. This is an ongoing videocast series that we have focused on COVID-19 and its impact on the public relations profession, as well as the interconnected areas of marketing and corporate strategy as well. Today, I'm very honored and humbled to have a dear friend and colleague, Colleen Campbell from Alion Sciences. We're going to talk about everything from Alion as a company, the way in which practitioners, in-house public relations practitioners such as Colleen, are navigating the current COVID-19 situation, as well as some tactical recommendations on what can be done as a public relations practitioner from a measurement standpoint, from an evaluation standpoint in the current times. So Colleen, welcome. We'd love to get started with a little bit of background on Alion, as well as your role.
Sure. Thanks for having me, Mo, and hello, everybody. My name is Colleen Campbell. I am the Vice President of Communications and Marketing at Alion Science and Technology. We are a defense contractor located in McLean, Virginia, right outside Washington, D.C. And we specialize in artificial intelligence, C5ISR, cyber, as well as electronic warfare. So as you can imagine, most of our customers are in the Department of Defense as well as the intelligence community. And that is a little bit about Alion. I'm very fortunate that I get to work with some of the best and brightest engineers and technologists every single day. And certainly we are also addressing and having to deal with the impacts of COVID as it exists today. So Mo, thank you for inviting me, and I look forward to our discussion. And I also look forward to learning a lot about what our audience thinks of the current situation around public relations and marketing as it relates to COVID.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for participating, Colleen. To start out, why don't we jump right into to COVID-19 and the impact that it's had for Alion, and specifically how you are conducting business on a day-to-day basis. What are the biggest changes that this has brought for you, and does this bring a permanent impact on the company, or do you guys have more of a sort of a short-term approach to dealing with this particular crisis?
Well, I think like everybody, the biggest impact so far on our business in terms of COVID has been the rapid change, obviously, in how we do business with a mostly remote workforce. As we know, given that we are a defense contractor, many of our contracts require us to do work on site and be present in order to ensure and enable national security functions. And we've been very fortunate that we've had fantastic partnerships and guidance from our DoD customers and intelligence customers, and have been able to, ensure that that continues. But certainly our workforce has gone primarily remote, as I'm sure many of my colleagues listening out there are experiencing as well. So the biggest impact from a communication standpoint has now been even a greater emphasis. There was always an emphasis, but a greater emphasis on internal communications, and not just communicating about remote work best practices and obviously how to log in remotely and all the IT standards, but also making sure that we're keeping that connection with the workforce, that they feel very much a part of the organization, increasing engagement through virtual events and town halls, as well as making sure that we are highlighting the great work that's going on around the enterprise, not just from a customer and business perspective, but from the ingenuity of our engineers and our technologists as it relates to actually helping to address the pandemic. And one of the examples is we have an engineer who took it upon himself to actually design and 3D print masks for first responders on the front lines in hospitals, as well as those who are having to go and address medical emergencies during this time. And we are obviously distributing them as quickly as we can, as fast as we can, to get them out. And we've also had some really great participation from employees who are doing everything from sponsoring food trucks to go to local hospitals to feed the medical personnel, to people making masks for their colleagues as well as others in their communities who may not have immediate access. So this has been a tremendous opportunity, as far as I'm concerned, to really do enhanced storytelling and really play up the great work that's being done by my colleagues at Alion. But again, that emphasis on internal communications has been the biggest, I think, emphasis that we've had as a result of COVID, as well as the setup and the business transformation that really happened overnight.
Sure. And certainly, from a day-to-day standpoint, one of the common themes that we are seeing is that public relations practitioners have one of two orientations. Either they have what I'll call the wait and see orientation, or they have the proactive public relations orientation. And the wait and see orientation really being more emblematic of uh, public relations practitioners that are cautioning their leadership teams when it comes to any new announcements, any new public relations efforts, and basically just taking a step back and understanding how the landscape is going to evolve over this next period of time, and then to truly sort of be ready to scale public relations efforts back up. And on the other hand, we're seeing other public relations practitioners take a more proactive approach, being very, very involved, not only when it comes to internal communications, but also external communications, and almost making sort of COVID-19 a catalyst for a lot of their public relations activities. So Colleen, in your perspective, if the choice is between this kind of wait and see approach versus the more proactive approach to public relations in the current environment, what do you see as more favorable and more prudent for the public relations practitioner today?
Well, ultimately, you have to do both because, as we know, business continues. And it is a great time to be a strategist, because I've always said the best strategist, if you're a really good strategist, you're almost like a telephoto lens. You have to be able to zoom in on the immediate and the absolute necessary to get through, if you will, the day by day, or as we know as public relations sometimes, the minute by minute changes that you were dealing with. But you also have to be able to take a long-term view and zoom out and really see what's around the horizon. And I know there's a lot of uncertainty right now in terms of, what will a new normal or return to normal may look like. But from a public relations standpoint, it really requires right now that you do both. So you need to be able to plan, and I certainly have read of companies who are certainly looking at the timing of announcements, new product launches, new go-to-market strategies, and that is very smart. It is time to reevaluate those things, but it does not mean it's time to discontinue those things. And so I think to put it into a dichotomy of a choice of, it has to be A or B is a little bit short-sighted. I think we have to be able to do both and recognize that the needs of the business need to continue. And this is a time from a public relations standpoint where we need to make sure that we're really telling the stories effectively, and that we are planning and working hand in hand with our marketing partners, our business development partners, our customer relations partners, to make sure that we are addressing the business needs. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, and we all read the headlines in terms of the economic market and the workforce today, we need thriving businesses in order to continue to grow our economy moving forward. So now is not the time necessarily to put everything on pause. It is the time to reevaluate, and probably reevaluate our go-to-market strategies and our storytelling strategies to make sure that we are having the impact on the business that is desired.
Mm-hmm. That's a really interesting perspective, Colleen. You spoke a little bit about this kind of cross-functional collaboration that's really a business imperative in the current times. Have you seen any change in the way in which in-house public relations and marketing practitioners are engaging with their external agency partners? In other words, if there's a need for increased communication and collaboration cross-functionally between communications, marketing, HR, manufacturing and so on and so forth. Does that also apply to the in-house Marcom practitioner and their advertising or public relations agencies?
Oh, absolutely. And I think we all read the trades and we read every single day, and it's normal when you're in an economic downturn. As we know, one of the biggest challenges for anyone who works in communications or marketing is sometimes you feel that it's your budget that always gets touched first, right? And makes you nervous. And I think that in terms of how we are continuing to use and relate to our external partners, both on the public relations side as well as the marketing side, is again, it's that strategic evaluation. As we know, many events for the rest of the year have either been canceled, rescheduled, or indeterminate. So we're looking at those types of budgets to figure out, are there better ways to leverage the thought leadership that we were looking to get out of those, say, specific events in different ways. So we're looking at a lot of content marketing, we're looking at a lot of native advertising, and then candidly, we're looking at making a lot of investments in the business that allows us to do a lot of rapid storytelling and creation of content, not just for marketing purposes, but also for public relations purposes, to help journalists tell stories as it relates to key business areas of Alion. So that's something that we're looking at. The other thing that we're looking at in terms of our agency partners is really sharing of intelligence. And especially on the public relations side, I know many of my colleagues out there probably use their agencies to help craft media strategies and thought leadership plans. And what we have found in the age of COVID that we're now in is really making sure that, one, we understand what the business market needs are for driving our business still, and the narratives that the journalists are looking to cover, so we have a better understanding of how we might be able to help them tell the story more effectively as it relates to anything that is a line of expertise for our business. So that's something that I think agencies in particular have a very strong role is that ultimately, usually they have multiple clients across multiple industries. And they are able to see trends across the board. So I think agencies being able to share those trends as it relates to media relations, topics of interest, and how it relates back to the business are really, really critical at this point.
Mm. Indeed, we're seeing, the kind of emphasis of that bond, that strong bond that exists between the brand and the agency being emphasized quite a bit, especially in trade publications around public relations and advertising these days. A related topic, Colleen, that that we see coming up over and over and over again nowadays is the confusion and the difficulty that many public relations practitioners are having when it comes to simply pushing a message that permeates this kind of body of messages around COVID-19. That is to say that just very, very frequently we are coming across brands that are basically saying, pre-COVID-19, all of the communications, across the entire landscape, as it pertains to a particular industry, were basically business communications. And now, whether you talk about the automotive industry or whether you talk about the healthcare industry, energy, I was talking to an energy client, just all of the actual conversation is COVID related. So if a brand is trying to evaluate how they might pursue a public relations initiative or a public relations campaign, let's say, geared at a common initiative like reputation, how might they consider sort of navigating and maneuvering around just the domination of COVID-19 as it pertains to just message penetration across the entire communications landscape?
Mo, that's a great question. And there's no doubt that COVID-19 dominates our messaging and our landscape. It dominates our news. It dominates our lives in terms of how we're living day to day in many cases. And so it's a challenge. And I think you're right. I mean, prior to this happening, there was a lot of emphasis on the messaging and the business strategy. I don't think that needs to change. Because again, like I said, I think we need thriving businesses. I think a lot of businesses right now are adapting to the new changes, but in terms of the narrative and how I think your real question gets through, how do you break through and actually be able to make the points that you want to make for your business? I think the challenge is, one, making sure that you're staying relevant to your business overall mission, right? And what you do and what you do well. And the second is recognizing that we are in a new world, a new paradigm where people's attention is very much on what is the latest and greatest that's happening, and how, the return to office or return to life uh, phases are rolling out in individual states moving forward. And I think it's important to remember that while this may seem like a slow rollout, people are going to return to their lives and somewhat a sense of normalcy. So in order to break through, I think it's really recognizing that you have to do this delicate balance between addressing the reality that we are in and also addressing the ideal outcome that you want for your business to thrive moving forward. And that means adjusting the narrative to be sensitive to your audience, that they may not have the capacity of interest for how you used to do things. So your content, your messaging, the supporting documentation and factoids you provide need to address for the sensitivity of the environment that we're in. But never lose sight of why we do what we do. And why we do what we do as public relations practitioners is to really make sure that we are communicating as transparently and as authentically as possible about our value to an audience. And I think if we can keep our focus on the value that we are providing, even in terms of uncertainty, even in times of crisis, we are doing a good job. And our ability to be adaptable is ultimately what's going to make a public relations campaign or a public relations messaging platform successful in this environment.
Some great tactical recommendations there, Colleen. Thank you for that. To wrap up, I think one interesting dimension to the current environment relates to measurement, and I suppose I'll reference a recent conversation I had with the Fortune 500 energy company that was basically, I'll summarize their narrative as follows. On an ongoing basis, they do reputation measurement, and they've come to the conclusion that given the current circumstances surrounding COVID-19 and increasingly the public scrutiny around larger corporations benefiting from government stimulus, et cetera, there is a concern from a corporate communication standpoint that the impact of these kinds of discussions will be very negative on corporate reputation, especially in certain industry sectors such as oil and gas, et cetera. So if, number one, are communications practitioners right to assume that, in general, given the current circumstances, there might be an unusual decline in their brand's reputation in this next period of time? And the follow-up to that would be, from a measurement standpoint, how does a communications practitioner sort of evolve the way that they measure their performance when there are so many external factors that are going to make it harder and harder for them to do that?
Great question. And I think all of us are feeling the effects of measurement impacts as a result of this, and how we are going to continue to be able to demonstrate the effectiveness and also the optimizations necessary in order to be effective moving forward. So I think in terms of the concern around, let's say, reputational bias or reputational lack of interest, or perhaps impact on reputational sentiment in this environment, it is valid. And I think it is valid depending on the market you are in. So a counter to the oil and gas example that you just provided, Mo, I would actually counter right now would be a fantastic time if you are in healthcare might be a good time to get out there and do some reputational benchmarking, because I think you have the attention of a very keen and engaged audience that is very much interested in learning what a healthcare organization is doing around COVID. And I think that would be an interesting time to go out and evaluate that. You could still get the reputational bias as a result, obviously. But I do think that now would be a good time to go out and actually look at those type of reputational markers if they exist in place. And I think it would be fascinating for you to interview somebody who is in the healthcare side to see what they are seeing and to see if they find it's having any impact at all. But certainly in other markets, and I said obviously in defense, it's interesting because we are looking at how we are measuring our reputation, how we are measuring the effectiveness of public relations at this time. And what we are finding is that we are really looking at our audience reach metrics more than anything else, really making sure that we're still targeting and doing the outreach to our key audiences as defined for our business. In terms of the reputation metrics, the one thing that I think is really interesting, and this gets back to my previous point about having to do both, evaluate for where you are and then thinking long term, it would make sense, I think, for anyone who was planning to go out, say, in the summer with a reputational survey, or maybe that's when you do your benchmarking, to maybe wait. I think that, but you can't put it off forever. I don't think 2020 should become this year of devoid of metrics, because that serves no one. And if you think about it, in my personal opinion, from a practitioner standpoint purely, it would be a fascinating time to get a read on the different market reputation indicators across the board, whether it be healthcare, oil and gas, defense, aerospace, you name it, telecommunications, big tech, only because we are in such extraordinary times. We are living through a measurement outlier, and you have kind of two choices there. You can decide to back off and decide that the data may not be valid, or you can lean in and see if there's anything that you can learn that would maybe be helpful moving forward. So if we find ourselves, hopefully not, but if we find ourselves in the future having to do longer term quarantines or anything like that, that we have the lessons learned and we have the perceptions that existed the first go around to see if they would match the second go around and be able to adjust accordingly. So I think that's really fascinating. I think businesses that feel comfortable should lean in and do it. And perhaps for some, and certainly the example you gave is a very good one, the market indicators indicate that now would not be a good time. And I think that's right. Mm-hmm. But I would love to see some data.
Yeah. Really interesting perspective. And if I could just get your reaction on something that we've been considering between the collective efforts of the Institute of Public Relations as well as AMEC. And that's this idea that the current environment may necessitate the creation of an independent third-party metric that communicates the extent to which a brand is impacted by COVID-19. And the underlying idea is that, there are some that believe that there are many brands that are not taking COVID-19 as seriously as they should from a communications and marketing standpoint, and that such a third-party kind of independent analysis that looks at a variety of different companies across a variety of different industry sectors that basically assesses the reputational and multi-stakeholder engagement impact of COVID-19 for a particular industry would help equip public relations practitioners with essentially the data and the ammo that they need to have these kinds of tough conversations with their CEOs about the fact that there needs to be a substantial effort to stabilize the brand and to stabilize multi-stakeholder engagement, whether it's with employees, customers, suppliers, NGOs that they work with, et cetera. What's your reaction on something like that, this kind of third-party independent. I mean, we're kind of metrics and data geeks. So anytime something unusual happens, we are tempted to create a new metric or a new KPI. So that's the caveat, but what's your take?
Well, I think my immediate take, obviously, is if you were to create an output like that, obviously, I think there'd be a lot of interest, but there's going to be a lot of scrutiny. Because I think the question becomes, what makes this evaluation criteria different? Is it purely the situation and the impact on lifestyle elevated that really is driving the evaluation? Or is it market impacts? And I think those are kind of, obviously they're related, but I think in terms of when I were to dig into the variables that would be in this new evaluation criteria, that's where I would spend the bulk of my time. And I think I would look at it a little bit with a little bit more critical eye than I would anything else. Because when you decide, for example, to include healthcare as one of the markets and evaluate it maybe against the same criteria as oil and gas, or evaluated against the same criteria as big tech right now, which we know is having a moment as a result of COVID, and rightfully so, because they're the ones kind of underlying a lot of this virtual conversation and enabling the workforce. I would wonder how fair it would be. Because as we all know, and since I work in the defense market, I know this better than most, our markets are subject to a lot of nuance. My customer set is very different than, say, a consumer customer set, you know? So I think it's an interesting idea. I think I would want to know more specifics around it, and to see, does it make sense, or is there really too much nuance in certain markets for it to be effective? But I'd read it.
Great perspective.
No doubt about that. Like I said, it's certainly going to get attention, but I think I would be very much in the methodology, wanting to understand.
Yeah, as I would expect you to be. You know, yeah, the listeners probably don't know this, but in fact, geeking out about methodology is how Colleen and I initially met. So we get carried away about that sometimes.
Yeah, we do. But I love that about you, Mo, is that you're willing to talk methodology, variables, and you know, all other kinds of things as it relates to our business. So I appreciate that. But yeah, it's fascinating. And I think we're all in a very, you know, unique circumstance. I think that practitioners now are calling upon every single skill set they have in their toolbox. And certainly that is something that I think is what makes us extraordinary communicators for extraordinary circumstances. And I tip my hat to everyone out there who's on the front lines every day, you know, who are the communicators working in healthcare facilities, working in hospital networks, and everyone else doing public safety and emergency management services. I just tip my hat to you all. You are doing fantastic work. And I thank you from the bottom of my heart, everyone who's on the front lines, and including my colleagues who are doing retail and grocery and everything else. I mean, you all are really doing extraordinary work, great thought leadership, great communication on what the public needs to know. And so it's the very definitions of excellence in public relations, and I tip my hat to you all.
Indeed, and of course, we also extend a thank you from the Institute of Public Relations as well as Radian Partners to those that are involved in the day-to-day operations around COVID. Well, Colleen, I think that brings us to a conclusion of our discussion today, and there you have it, folks. Perspective from a leader in the defense sector, Alion, and certainly a leader in the communications and marketing world, Colleen Campbell. Thank you again for joining me today, and for those listeners, we will catch you again during the next conversation, and you'll likely see that just about a week from when this is released. So thanks again, and appreciate your participation, Colleen.
Well, Mo, thanks for having me, and everyone out there, stay safe.
Indeed. Stay safe, everyone.